I will start recording. Yeah. And we go. And we go here, stream key, pin count. And we go, I want here. Broadcast. What's this? Interactive pause. So copy. Chris, are you there? Yeah.
Yeah, I am. Yeah.
So, just like live on Facebook. Sorry, man.
No, that's all right. No rush.
It's first time I'm doing it, and just sharing your page and menu manage and here next and sorry. A few more clicks.
I'm fine.
Okay. Go live. I click it. And we are live. Yeah.
That's it.
I believe we are live. Yeah. Just to check. Hello. Pozdrav svim ljudima u Srbiji. Samo proveravam da li smo krenuli live. Imamo gosta pravo iz Singapura, gospodina Chrisa Roba. Da, mislim da idemo live. Samo trenutak. Da vidim ljude. Da se malo okupimo. Chris, we are waiting just people to be noted and to ping some of our fans or runners of Belgrade. Yeah, we are live. Great to see you. So here is the Chris Robb, the CEO of Mass Participation World. Chris is a fantastic guy from Singapore. He's, I say, the shaper, not just of running, but the whole mass participation industry in Asia. He's the founder and organizer of the biggest mass participation sports conference, Mass Participation Asia. He is talking with key leaders of running industry in the world. And I'm very glad that I'm also one of his students in a mass participation masterclass he's organizing. So Chris, nice to have you here.
Hey, wonderful to see you, Beryl. It's really great to have this opportunity to connect with people in Serbia, and you know we've been working together on the Mass Participation Masterclass for a year now. So I begin to feel that I know a little bit about this wonderful industry in your country where it's starting to emerge. I've been very lucky. I've been in the industry for over 35 years now. It takes me a long time to get rid of the gray hair before I come on show every time. But I've had many incredibly wonderful highlights. I organized my first running event when I was 16, growing up on a farm in Zimbabwe. And my journey's taken me to many wonderful places, and so lucky to be part of this incredible industry, which impacts the lives of so many people in so many positive ways. And obviously very relevant right now in COVID-19. We were talking before we went live about how many people you see out on the streets of Belgrade running, and I'm hearing those stories all over the world. You know, there's this running boom. You know, in the 70s and 80s, we had this amazing running boom in terms of marathons and running events, and it's kind of happening now independently. So let's hope that once we get past COVID-19, it continues. But it's wonderful to see.
Super. We do have now here on a live Facebook Live, like 55,000 of people, runners in Serbia. What you can say now for runners there? Some of them are not participating, taking races, but some of them are waiting to see what will happen, and they also planned a lot of races. Some of them are delayed, some of them are even cancelled. What you can say from the world perspective, what will happen with the events, and what they can plan for the future?
Yeah, look, it's a great question, and I think probably the most important word I would say right now is patience. I hosted a webinar this morning, and I'm hosting another version of it tonight as well, which was called the New Operational Normal, and we had over 200 people from all over the world, from Chicago to New Zealand to, and this afternoon we'll have a lot of people.
These are race organizers, even from the Chicago Marathon.
Yeah. Mike Nishi, partner of Chicago Event Management. We had people from Ironman, Spartan, right across the mass participation industry. We had Hugh Singh, who's the medical director of the Singapore Marathon, which has 50,000 participants in it. And the conclusion was that there's more questions than answers right now. There's no silver bullet. The silver bullet to end this is a vaccine, which is a long time off. And I think the reality is that, it's going to take some time, and it's going to vary from country to country. Some countries are coping with it really well. Other countries like, Italy and Spain, and obviously America, it continues to be a real problem. And the reality is that mass participation events and mass gatherings, as life returns to normal, we're almost at the back of the line. Whilst I think, more and more governments recognize the value of people being active and being healthy and so on, they obviously need to manage this risk that's associated with it. So, I think from a runner's perspective, I can't give any, I don't understand the situation in Serbia enough, but from a global perspective, I think it's going to be later rather than sooner that we're going to come back online. I think it's important to keep active, to stay fit, to train, because obviously you as best you can in your circumstances. What's going to happen is, when the races eventually do come back on, one of the challenges is going to be, are runners going to be fit enough to be able to do a marathon or an Ironman or so on? So if you want to be in that situation, that when the green button gets pressed and we can move forward again, train as much as you can in your circumstances, because the risk is that the events happen, you're not fit enough, you don't enjoy it, or worst case still, you get injured because you're trying to go away and push yourself. So, that would be my other advice, is when you get the opportunity to be on a start line again, be conservative. Go back, enjoy your first race, be part of that camaraderie, but maybe don't push yourself too hard right from the beginning, because that may end up, being the end of your season. But I think, the reality, if I were to be a betting man, I would think that, in most instances, it's unlikely that there's going to be many events in 2020. I think we're starting to move towards 2021 already. That's more and more what I'm seeing. And, we're talking to, you mentioned there's event organizers on here as well. And I think, maybe from a runner's perspective, to understand maybe the challenges that event organizers like yourself are going through. Everyone is trying to do the best thing for everyone else. Event organizers obviously have businesses which are now in massive financial difficulties, and it's happening across many industries. So understanding as a runner what challenges those people are making. Understand that one of the critical components of any running event is medical support. And so we have this situation right now where we have these amazing frontline medical staff that have been working 10, 11, 12, 14, 15 hours a day. So when COVID ends, most of them are going to want to have their life back. So are they now going to be prepared to come and work on events at the weekend? So how are we going to get medical coverage? How are we going to get volunteers and all those kind of things? The impact that is going to make on those events is, maybe runners are going to need to kind of put their hand up and say, you know what, I'm going to help the industry out by being a volunteer rather than participating in events. It's obviously in all of our interests as passionate runners or passionate organizers that we work together to make sure that this industry survives. So if you're a runner that's demanding that every event organizer gives you your refund back in full, you might get your $10 or your $15 or your $20, but in the process, that event might not be there next year. So, you might want to consider that a small sacrifice as a runner might be a long-term gain for you in terms of supporting this industry. What I think many runners around the world don't recognize is that in many instances, this industry runs on tiny, tiny margins. And I'm already seeing businesses starting to go out of business because they just don't have that sustainability to manage their staff, to manage their overheads, because they don't make massive profits. They operate on very skinny cash flow. Sponsorship is going to be difficult. So if you're a runner out there who's listening to this and you're at an organization that may be able to support an event from a sponsorship, I think there's great business outcomes that can come out of it. I think it's a great opportunity for engagement, but maybe there's an opportunity to say we have a community commitment as a sponsor to be able to support these events. So we're providing some kind of give back to the community that presents an opportunity for runners to be active.
Chris, fantastic points here for the runners. But you also mentioned the government. So here in Serbia, we have a Ministry of Youth and Sport, and we are a traditional country for the sport, like football, basketball, now tennis with Novak Djokovic and everything. But people are not so active in Serbia in a way, like everyday active physical activity. And running is about health. Running is about benefit for all people. And you organize the Singapore Marathon, and you work with a Singapore government, with a lot of government. What you can suggest for our government, for Ministry of Youth and Sport, for in the point of running, and why so much important this mass participation sport as one aspect of sport?
It's a really great question, Beryl Joban. I think that many governments around the world are starting to recognize the value of mass participation, but some of them still don't see that value. And typically what we see traditionally happening around the world is governments measure economic impact of mass participation events. So if I take Singapore as an example, 50,000 participants, 10,000 of those come from outside of Singapore. And for many years, the measure of success from a government perspective that's measured, and recognizing that what I'm about to talk about is not necessarily easy to measure, but the economic impact is 10,000 runners spending on average 3.5 bed nights, multiplied by a number gives you maybe tens of millions of dollars worth of economic impact and benefit. But what most governments don't measure or take into consideration, and it's difficult because there is no empirical measure that I'm aware of, and we're trying to do a study to understand what that may be, is that there's 40,000, as the Singapore example, 40,000 Singaporeans that participate in the event that themselves are living a more healthy lifestyle. So they are reducing health costs by reduced heart attacks, reduced strokes, obesity, and all that. That increasing productivity, and there's plenty of research that proves that by being fit and active, you reduce stress, all those kind of things. Reduction in mental health problems, increased bonding, multicultural people working together across different cultures, particularly in a city or country like Singapore that is very multicultural. And then again, this kind of leveling the playing field. You have a CEO running with the person that works in the mailroom, or the person that works in the canteen. We're all on this level playing field. So it creates this amazing community bonding. I've been doing some work with a behavioral economist out of Australia, a very renowned man, and his name's Peter Burrow. And he believes that the ripple effect goes 10 people deep. So let's assume that you, Beryl, you're running in a marathon or a 10K event. We believe that you directly impact the health and well-being of 10 other people. So, for example, your immediate family, you have a partner and you have 2 children. They eat more healthy. They maybe do some exercise with you. they get excited when they see you participating in an event. Your extended family, your parents, your brothers and sisters, your work colleagues, your friends, even if it's people that are following you on Facebook, they're getting a little bit of a endorphin hit when they see what you've done. We believe that that positive impact goes 10 people deep. But even if it only goes 5 people deep, and you take the example of the Singapore Marathon, 40,000 local people going 5 deep, that's 200,000 people that are being positively impacted. Reduced health costs, reduced physical and mental health costs, and increased productivity. So what I'm talking about more and more through Mass Participation World is talking with cities and governments and doing consulting work to address and set up mass participation as a strategy. So not putting obstacles in place, saying we are a city that's open for mass participation. We embrace mass participation. We recognize the value that it creates. And that's not necessarily about government giving a handout and giving a lot of money to races, but it's putting in place infrastructure to support mass participation, designing cities in such a way that people can cycle, designing running tracks, taking the parks where events happen on a regular basis and say, so typically what happens in most cities, and I'm sure it's not dissimilar where you are, you have 2 or 3 or maybe 4 main venues that are used. Every weekend, people bring in generators, they bring in portaloos, they bring in barricades, they bring in tents. What if the government were to say, we'll build more toilets here, we'll provide barricades, we'll put in enough power that's appropriate that we don't have to bring in generators. So what do generators do? Sustainability, they're creating pollution, they're doing all those kind of things. So we build a city that's open for business. We adopt mass participation as a strategy, because not only does it create health and well-being, but it creates its own ecosystem. You have timing companies, you have event organizers, you build a culture of volunteerism, which, you know, we're seeing in these times of COVID-19. People that have grown up with volunteering on marathons and so on are now open to go and volunteer and help in food banks and all those kind of things. So you build this culture and this ecosystem. And the analogy that I've been talking about often recently, you see cities that go and spend tens of millions of dollars bidding for the rights for whether it be a Commonwealth Games, a World Championship, an Olympics at the highest level. And the question that I ask is, how long does that halo effect last after that thing that you've paid the rights for goes? Is it 5 years? Is it 10 years? Is it 15 years? But if you build a Boston Marathon, a New York Marathon, a Singapore Marathon, that's there forever as long as you sustain it. And it then builds a calendar of events which happen. People need to train for the Singapore Marathon, which happens on the first Saturday and Sunday of December every weekend. So it creates this whole ecosystem of other events, of timing companies, of running shops, of physiotherapists, of doctors, of dietitians and all that. And you impact the economy in such a massive way, as opposed to, okay, there's this impact of an event that you've paid millions of dollars for the rights for, but 20 years down the track, or 10 years or 5 years down the track, how long has that halo been? And I'm not pretending that every city can build a New York or every city can build a Boston or a Singapore, but even if you've got a 10,000 people city marathon with all the rest around it and an ecosystem, there is no doubt that you create health and social benefits and economic benefits that are significant. And then you create these tourism benefits, which are part of economic, because the broadcast happens in these days of social media, it gets shared, and you create this massive ripple effect that not only goes in one city, but it then ripples out into the neighboring towns and villages and cities and across the country.
Fantastic, Chris. Always fantastic to hear you. And I hope someone will hear what you just said, and how this industry is not just about money. It's the whole how are you looking at strategically on so many levels are so important, and we see it from now. We see it from our race director side, and I hope that we will be enough capable and resourceful to see the great chance we have in this modern time when we are a lot more sitting and just watching sport and not participating. But I wanted finally to ask you something about race directors in Serbia. We do have a Belgrade Marathon, which is the first marathon in Serbia and in the region, 33 year old marathon. It's developing, and it's the company which had 3 more races in their portfolio. We have our races, corporate runs, but we also see that there is a little and small organizers in other parts of the country. So these organizers are not full-time employed; they are part-time, but they are looking. I see that many of them would like to be like full-time teams, so they can bring more, because they are passionate. We are here in our industry, we are passionate. We are living for our events. And a lot of them must cancel their events. It will be maybe easier for them to start the next year. But what you can suggest for these smaller events and the organizers which are in the phase to make their living from it, not just like a part-time, but to make 1 or 2 people, like a mom and dad company. What you like best advices you can hear from the world for them?
Yeah, look, again, another wonderful question. And, the way I look at it is, this is kind of like the pyramid. At the top, you have the world marathon majors and maybe the Ironmans. In the middle, you have these medium companies, and the pyramid is propped up by all these, what I call passion projects. And I was one of them. I think I shared with you, I grew up in Zimbabwe, organized my first fun run when I was 16. And, I came out of a passion. I had no business sense, no idea.
I didn't know that.
Yeah. I moved to Australia. I arrived in Australia with $15,000 in my pocket, which if I look back on it now is probably, not much in these days, but in those days was reasonable. By the time I'd found an apartment and, bought some furniture and whatever, I maybe started my first business with maybe 3 or 4, at most $5,000 worth of working capital. I was working 3 jobs and it was my passion that carried me through. And I did it on a part-time basis, and slowly my business built, and I was lucky enough to end up working on the Sydney Olympics as the road event supervisor. And, that then took me with JP Morgan as a client, and I moved on to Singapore. And, I've now been in Asia for 15 years. I had the wonderful opportunity in 2015 to write my book, Mass Participation Sports Events, which shares, at that stage, about 30 years of experience of my learnings. And, in those days, we didn't have many mentors around. I kind of learned through what I call the school of hard knocks, and I learned many, many wonderful lessons that have served me so well. But I guess what I'm saying is there is the opportunity to move up to build that middle-sized business and grow, but it comes with it lots of different commercial and economic challenges. And the advice that I would give is to have this kind of consideration of what is it that you really want. Because what I discovered belatedly is, my business grew to organizing the likes of the Singapore Marathon, 30 full-time staff, massive overheads. I lost my Australian business in the global financial crisis. One of the biggest challenges I've ever faced was standing in front of my staff. Some of them had been with me for 10 years, with the administrator standing next to me, telling them that they didn't have a job from that moment on. I'd made mistakes. I got things wrong. Cash flow was a big issue for me. And I've had, as every small business does, I've had those challenges as my business has grown from one level to the next level. And what I realized just before I actually ended up selling my Singapore business to Ironman, and before that, I'd gone through some incredibly tough times in the years before that for a number of different reasons. And the realization for me was that as my business had grown, I'd moved further and further and further away from the reasons that I got into it. I was running this business of 30 staff, and I was spending all my time managing staff issues, managing cash flow, worrying about cash flow, and all the pressure that goes with that, as opposed to doing the stuff that I really loved, which was creating the events, being creative, being on the ground. I was still seeing the faces of those runners, which is still one of my biggest thrills. But the advice that I would give is to be very clear on, what your end goal is, why you got into it in the first place, what is your purpose, and and bigger is not always better. And my sense is that the people that are probably going to come out of this the strongest are going to be those people at the base of the pyramid, because they don't have the overheads right now. They can literally stay at home. That, yes, they might have to cancel an event, and that might be difficult, but they're not having to pay staff salaries for who knows how long that this may continue. And my sense is that we're probably in the whole ecosystem, not just event organizers and race directors. We're going to see more of the middle tier businesses disappear, and the little small 2 and 3 and 4 person businesses might well be the businesses that survive, that are able to pivot easy because they're nimble. They don't necessarily have to cut costs because their costs are lean already. So what I would say is, in answer to your question, when you come out of this, be very, very clear what your purpose is, what your focus is, what you want to achieve. Bigger is not always better. Work in terms of partnership and collaboration. And I think, I've said this a number of times now, the people that are going to come out of this the strongest are the people that collaborate best and the people that communicate the best. So now is the time to be communicating with your creditors, most importantly, communicating with your sponsors, communicating with your participants, communicating with your staff, and on a regular basis being engaged, communicating with your family, communicating with yourself. What's your internal talk? We had a chat before this. You've got amazing internal talk. You're very positive. You know that you're going to come out of this. You feel very positive. No doubt you're going to have your days when it's not so great, but what's your internal dialogue? What are you saying to yourself in this time, which I believe is a massive opportunity. I believe that whilst there's terrible death and there's going to be loss of businesses, the opportunities that are going to come out of this time, the opportunity for humanity to take time out to reflect on what's important, recognize what we have rather than what we don't have. I can in some very way relate to the people of Serbia. I grew up in an independence war in Zimbabwe. I had a period where, my father would every morning would walk from our farm gate to the bitumen to check that landmines hadn't been laid before I went to school. I'd slept with a gun next to my bed, and I lost many of my friends in service. And I don't want to bring up old wounds, but what I'm saying is that my belief would be that many of the Serbian people recognize and appreciate the small things in life, and they are going to be better positioned than people in many other countries to be able to go through this, because you've been through hardship and challenge. I call them the gifts of disaster. What's the word I'm looking for here? Challenge and adversity brings out the best in you. I do quite a lot of public speaking. One of my keynotes is the gifts of disaster. The other is power of pause. And one of the slides that I put up in my gifts of disaster is half of the slide is diamonds and half of it is coal. We both know that diamonds and coal are created from extreme pressure. And I say you have the choice after COVID-19. Do you want to be a diamond? Do you want to look for the opportunities? Or do you want to look at the dark and come out of it as coal? And I sort of end this by saying, we all have an opportunity to be diamonds. We all have an opportunity to look for diamonds if we choose to.
Chris, it was very inspirational what you said, and thank you a lot for all the people from Serbia, and for our runners and the race directors, and I hope so for our government. I must tell now that I'm working with you 1 year on your mass participation class, master class, and I suggest everyone just to follow you on LinkedIn. You're there, a lot of different people you're interviewing. You're in the center of industry, and thank you really much for this interview, but also for the last year working with you. And I hope you will come to Serbia one day.
I would love to come to Serbia, and thank you so much for this wonderful opportunity. And to your listeners, if anyone would like to contact me, email me directly if there's some way I might be able to help you. Chris@chrisrob.asia. I'm very happy for you to put that in the chat. As Veral Jub said, I'm doing I'm doing lots of things to try and support this industry. We have every Monday a session called Strength in Numbers, which is a free open chat Zoom room where people from all over the world just come and we share our challenges and opportunities and learn what people are doing from around the world. So again, follow me on LinkedIn to see those details. I'm running masterclasses every Friday. And I also do a thing called the Aid Station. I've just interviewed Beryl Jubb for that. I'm interviewing people from all over the world, and any way I can help this wonderful industry all over the world. Thank you so much. It's great to see you. All the very best to all your listeners on Facebook Live, and thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Chris. Have a nice day, man.
Thank you. Bye bye, Beryl Jubb. Bye bye.